Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 29th of July 2014. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Good afternoon.
And, well, the weather, it's very humid down here, pretty hot, but lots of grey clouds. So we think a bit of thunder. And I think the forecast across UK as a whole is more of the same, really. So stay with it. Well, if we put dangerous people into Parliament, we can expect dangerous things to happen. And we better kick off with what our new Defence Secretary and, of course, King Cameron are up to. And it's quite apparent to us that Putin must be terrified as David Cameron is flexing his muscles. Now, this is, we've taken this story from the Western Daily Press, but it's in many of the mainstream papers, that some 1,300 British troops are to take part in a major NATO exercise in Eastern Europe in a further show of strength by the Western alliance in the face of Russia's continuing destabilisation of the Ukraine. And Mr. Fallon has said that the UK will be sending a full battle group to take part in exercise Black Eagle in Poland this autumn, in the largest British commitment to the region since 2008. So massive numbers of British troops pouring into the region. Well, of course, they can only manage this sort of number of British troops because David Cameron has been cutting British armed forces to the bone, in particular the British Army. But let's remember what sort of man we're dealing with, because many articles have appeared on Mr. Fallon in relation to the fact that he called a young lady a slut in a drunken bar clash. So it looks like we've got some quality people here now moving armed forces around Europe, and we would say helping to create an ever more dangerous situation. So never mind the paedophiles in Parliament. King David, assisted by classics with ancient history scholar Michael Fallon, are now warmongering, and we're saying that this is putting essentially US military lives at risk, because of course it is only the US that can bring in the necessary forces to do anything of substance. So let's look at David. Here he is playing literally with toy soldiers. We've put some statistics there about the number of armoured vehicles that UK has. So tanks 407, armoured vehicles 6,245, self-propelled guns 89, towed artillery 138, multiple launch rockets 56. And what many ex-servicemen and particularly ex-British Army are saying is that David Cameron has now cut Britain's army to the point at which it is simply not viable to operate overseas for more than a couple of weeks. And that's if you've even got the troops to put on the ground. Let's have a look at Mr. Putin, who must be very worried by David Cameron and Mr. Fallon. Russia's sitting on about 15,500 tanks, about 27,000 armoured vehicles, about 6,000 self-propelled guns, 4,625 towed artillery, and a mere 3,781 multiple launch rockets. So this would be laughable, Mike, if it wasn't so serious to watch these guys strutting around the world stage as if they've got power. But of course, this is all going to bounce back on the Americans.
I mean, speechless again, because
yes. It's getting very difficult to do this on a daily basis, because it's becoming so obvious that really we have the UK now governed by Muppets, is the best word that I can think of today. And then on the other side of the Atlantic, we've got Obama. Interestingly enough, there's an increasing number of mainstream articles pointing out not that he's going to be impeached, but there is unhappiness. But he's now hit the world stage because he's very upset that he says Putin has broken a Cold War era nuclear missile testing ban, and this is raising tensions further after the MH17 air debacle. Well, let's have a look at some of the comments in that article. The US says Russia has tested a new ground-launched cruise missile, breaking the intermediate-range nuclear Forces Treaty that Ronald Reagan signed with Mikhail Gorbachev. The Russians have had a look into the allegations and consider the matter closed. I thought that was a beautiful statement. Russian officials say they've looked into the allegations and consider the matter closed. I mean, that could have come straight out the Department of Education. No interest whatsoever. So clearly Putin is not at all rattled by King Cameron and his toy soldiers.
But in the meantime, Gaza continues to be a disaster for the Gazans, for the people in Gaza. And Netanyahu yesterday in a press conference saying, we need to be prepared for a long operation until our mission is accomplished. That was a televised press conference, and of course he didn't actually say what the mission is. So the question then is the mission the total annihilation of Gaza? That's certainly looking that way.
It's Greater Israel, I think, the establishment of the Greater Israeli Empire.
Indeed. So Netanyahu has described this conflict as a just war, and you got to ask on what basis. Now, of course, John Kerry put down some proposals for ceasing the conflict. And really, the Israelis went pretty nuts with what he wrote. So the Israeli press saying that they were deeply shocked that Kerry had placed Israel and Hamas on the same level in his document. The Justice Minister Tzipzi Livni told JTA that it was completely unacceptable and it would strengthen extremists in the region. And the Times of Israel wrote that Kerry's mistakes were embarrassing, and that very senior officials in Jerusalem described the proposal that Kerry put on the table as a strategic terrorist attack. So they're clearly pretty unhappy with anybody that's attempting to push forward anything that's sort of half sensible, unless it's absolutely resulting in the same agenda as the Israeli government. They're going to get slated in the press. But of course, it's not just Gaza and Israel, because Libya continues to disintegrate, plagued by faction fighting since obviously the United States and NATO launched air operations and got rid of Gaddafi and had Gaddafi murdered. And in the past year, the violence has just continued to accelerate. And now I believe the number in the last 2 weeks is 150 deaths, hundreds injured. Sorry, were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I can hardly believe that this is happening because, of course, the political charity Common Purpose has been operating in Libya for some time now, well over a year. And, of course, their job was to re-educate, to retrain, to reframe key civil servants in Libya so that Libya was going to move on to become a wealthy, prosperous country. So the European Union, of course, was funding all the activity by Common Purpose, and it seems that since Common Purpose has gone in, it's not getting more stable, it's destabilising.
Well, indeed, and it's getting to the point now where they can't even fight a fire. Admittedly, it's not your normal house fire, but that, you know, Britain, we were able to a few years ago deal with the Buncefield fire. It's about the same kind of scale. Libya is now asking for international help to fight this oil depot fire, and it was set on fire as a result of fighting between rival militias at Tripoli's airport. So it just continues to go. So I just thought we would have a quick look at a graph of the countries that are now in civil conflict as a result of, well, of what? Well, actually, we did this. So here we've got Ukraine, we've got Libya, we've got Syria, we've got Iraq, we've got Afghanistan and Pakistan, and obviously, you know, we're not directly responsible for Israel in a modern sense, but we certainly support them because, after all, King David is related and supports them absolutely.
I'm going to say the government supports them. We'll wind the we in a little bit because we're not very happy with what's going on.
I'll just say that I disagree with that, because for as long as the British people stand by and permit this government to do what it's doing, then we did this, you and I, and everybody in this country. Is that okay?
There's no answer to that, Mike.
Okay, so that sums that up. We are destroying this planet, and we need to sort that problem out, and we start with David Cameron and his government.
Yeah, so in government we've got, we're coming on to this, we've got people fiddling their expenses, of course. That's known as theft to most people, but if you're in government you fiddle your expenses. We've got people swearing at policemen, we've got the drunken sessions in the Westminster bars, we've got the paedophiles. We've now got defence ministers who are calling people sluts. Well, that's what's being reported anyway. And we're letting them loose on the world stage with weapons and armies.
It's no wonder the world's collapsing in a heap.
Absolutely not. So if we bring ourselves back to the subject of Melanie Shaw, we've had some progress on this overnight. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for everybody that is writing to Melanie at the moment, and also people who have taken the opportunity to write to MPs. We understand that MP Chris Leslie has now started to take some action to support Melanie Shaw. We'll be watching that closely. But could it be that pressure of the public has now started to make a few people take interest in this case? But we wanted to just bring your attention back to this, that of course in prison, Melanie is being treated, we think, very badly. She's been strip searched several times. She had her normal long-standing NHS prescription changed. She has basically been bullied by other inmates, and she is of course only in prison on remand. So here was what was reported to us from the trial, that basically when the judge asked about evidence, because it wasn't in his possession, everything became very woolly. And the judge pointed out that evidence is normally quite a simple requirement of a court. Where was the evidence for the Crown Prosecution Service and Nottinghamshire Police to bring charges? Well, that evidence did not appear in court, but quick as a flash, Melanie is put on remand in Peterborough prison, we think, up until October. Now, we decided to have a little look at the Crown Prosecution site, and it's well worth going to, because they have covered it with boasts about how they champion justice and they defend the rights of victims fairly, firmly and effectively is at the heart of all we do. So please go and have a look at the Crown Prosecution Service, and you will see they are very big on protecting victims who are vulnerable, and certainly victims who could be threatened because of the knowledge that they have.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't some woolly comment that we do our best, or we do it's on a best efforts basis. This is at the heart of what we do to protect witnesses and protect victims.
Absolutely, Mike. And as we're going to show, they've got a range of special measures which you can call up on the site, so that you can see that they've got their own policy documents, their own policy statements about they are there in particular to make sure that vulnerable witnesses, whether they're adults or children, are protected under special measures. So we have Melanie Shaw, the lady who was brave enough not only to talk about her own horrific rape and abuse at Beechwood Home, Children's Home, but also to whistleblow, so that now nearly some 100 people have come forward to say that they were also abused. What has the Crown Prosecution done to protect this lady? Well, they've put her into a particularly violent prison environment on the basis of no evidence.
No evidence, yeah.
Here's the principles that the Crown Prosecution Service worked to. Special measures, a series of provisions that help vulnerable and intimidated witnesses give their best evidence in court, and to help relieve some of the stress associated with giving evidence. Special measures apply to prosecution and defence witnesses, but not to the defendant. So this is, as you say, quite clear. We're not just talking about sort of glib statements. This is policy by the Crown Prosecution Service. And in fact, it gets deeper than that, because here is a document, early special measures, discussions between the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. And in this practice guidance, it says that the moment the Crown Prosecution Service or the police realise that the person they're dealing with is a vulnerable witness, they should be discussing how they're going to protect that witness. You can download this document yourself, and here it's saying an early special measures discussion is an opportunity for the police officer to inform the CPS prosecutor of the needs of the prosecution witnesses who may be considered to be vulnerable or intimidated. So very, very clear that there's a whole range of procedures. They even give case studies, and this is about domestic violence, but saying it's so important that witnesses who are likely to be threatened or intimidated because of the information they hold should be protected under this joint scheme between the Crown Prosecution and the police. So I will say that basically we spoke to the Crown Prosecution Service this morning. We spoke to the media team from their HQ, and we asked if they could explain how an extremely vulnerable witness, Melanie Shaw, could possibly be put into what we think is a dangerous and violent prison environment on the basis of no evidence produced in court. Well, interestingly enough, the CPS HQ attempted first of all to push us to the local Nottinghamshire Crown Prosecution Service. We said we weren't going to do that because this was to do with policy at the very top of the CPS, and we did get a call back. They've taken more information from us, but we've just got a little feeling that since we've asked the question, how can a vulnerable witness who has been whistleblowing on major child abuse in the Nottinghamshire area, how can that lady now be in prison after no evidence was submitted in court? There's been an embarrassed silence from the Crown Prosecution Service. Apparently they will come back to us in due course. Well, let's have a look at the lady responsible. Here she is, Alison Saunders, a barrister, of course, joined the CPS in 1986, so she's been there from the beginning. A very glowing CV, and we were particularly interested that not only has she headed up the organised crime division, she's dealt with cases from the Serious Organised Crime Agency and the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre. So it would appear that this lady is well up on the abuse of children, and we've asked for a formal statement from Alison Saunders to explain why her organisation has effectively put a vulnerable witness into an abusive environment in prison on no evidence. If you'd like to express your concerns to the Crown Prosecution Service, please do. You can find all the contact details on their website. Our feeling is that Alison Saunders is the lady that holds overall responsibility for her organisation, and we should suggest that communication should be directed to her. It's amazing stuff, really. Well, let's have a look at events in court from another angle, because the paper's crowing that former UKIP MEP Nikki Sinclair is now facing charges of misconduct and money laundering. And in this article, Ms Sinclair absolutely refutes the charges being brought against her. Basically, what we have been interested in is that throughout the investigation, West Midlands Police have been working jointly with officers from the European Anti-Fraud Office. Now, this seems to be a bit of an oxymoron because, of course, it was the fraud within the European Union that resulted in the resignation of the whole of the European Commission, if I remember correctly. We then had the Kinnocks were going to sort out fraud in the European Union. In Sheffield, where millions and millions of pounds disappeared as a result of fraud with EU grant money, the European Fraud Investigation Service, OLAF, were brought in. but they failed to apprehend a single person, and indeed took part in what appeared to be victimisation of the people who'd reported the fraud in the first place. So very, very interesting that the authorities have ganged up on Nikki Sinclair. She said that during her time as an MEP, she put in more than 120,000 of her salary into the cost of her work activities. She also says significantly that it was her in 2010 that drew the attention of the West Midlands Police to irregularities I discovered had taken place without my knowledge in my UKIP office. I strongly refute these charges and will be firmly defending myself. I'm certain I shall be found innocent of these ludicrous and unfounded accusations. It's interesting that when our own Westminster MPs were fiddling their expenses, I don't think any of them got charged with money laundering.
No, not that I'm aware of.
No. So I think the opinion of UK Column is that something dirty is going on here. But since we've got West Midlands Police working with the European Anti-Fraud Office, perhaps it's not surprising. I would also say we're in the 18th year of the European Union failing to produce signed and properly audited accounts of its finances, since no accountancy firm in Europe is silly enough to handle them because they're so dodgy. We just had this little bit at the bottom. Simon Orme, a specialist lawyer with the CPS Special Crime Division, said the decision to prosecute was taken in accordance with the code for Crown prosecutors. We have determined that there is a realistic prospect of conviction. So isn't this about probability here? We're not really interested whether a crime's been committed. We think we can sort of get it through.
Yeah. That's a CPS attitude these days.
CPS pretty good if it's UKIP or ex-UKIP MEPs and money. Not so good on child abuse victims. This was the CPS crowing on their own website about the fact that she's been charged with money laundering and misconduct in public office. We did a cursory search of CPS website. We couldn't actually see any mention of child abuse on it. Well, here we are, a fine example of the standards of our MPs. This is David Ruffley, Conservative MP. He's got to stand down after assaulting his ex-girlfriend. Allegedly. Well, he's had a caution from the police, Mike.
Okay.
So if we believe the police, I know this is tricky, it takes us into a delicate area.
Yes.
But he's had the caution, and he's now having to stand down because he doesn't like the media intrusion into his private life. But in an email to several Tory members, Andrew Speed, the chairman of the Bury St Edmunds Conservative Association, said he did not believe what happened, there was any link between what had happened and domestic violence. So there's quite a few people picked up on this. There was an assault, it was with his partner, but this isn't domestic violence according to the Tories. Mr Gove, of course, said he was sorry to see Mr Ruffley standing down. The Chief Whip said David Ruffley MP has given a huge amount to Parliament, both on the opposition front bench and as an outstanding member of the Treasury Select Committee. I'm sorry that he'd be standing down. Well, Michael Gove, of course, doesn't think there should be any investigation into, I was just saying, hold that one there for a second, sorry, any investigation into child abuse and assault. Well, there's nothing wrong with assault, so, I mean...
Is this not fair for Michael Gove? Because I thought his job was to protect MPs under these circumstances.
On the basis as Chief Whip.
Yes.
Yeah. It's getting quite confusing, isn't it? But let's lead on to Bob Kerslake. That's pretty ideal because having mentioned Olaf, and Sheffield was the city in question where the European money was disappearing.
Yes, well, David Cameron has announced the creation of a new chief executive post in the civil service. And in order to make room for that new chief executive, Sir Bob Kerslake is stepping down. So he's currently head of the civil service and he'll step down from that role this autumn, and then he's also permanent secretary of the Department of Communities and Local Government, and he will step down from that in February 2015 when he turns 60. And according to the government, Bob has had an outstanding career in public service over some 35 years, the pinnacle of which was becoming head of the civil service in January 2012. So David Cameron said, I would like to put on record my sincere thanks to Bob Kerslake for his long and distinguished public service. As Permanent Secretary of DCLG, he had supported a far-reaching programme of local decentralisation and planning reform, and as head of the civil service he has put in place a number of important reforms and building blocks that will help over time to transform the effectiveness of the civil service. Performance, efficiency and capability have all improved on his watch, and he can look back on his record of achievement with great satisfaction. So that's wonderful, isn't it? But then Deputy Prime Minister, who of course is a Sheffield man himself, Nick Clegg had this to say: it has been a pleasure to work closely with Bob over many years, both when he was Chief Executive of Sheffield City Council. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, so Nick Clegg is associating himself with Bob Kerslake while he was at Sheffield City Council.
Which is when all the millions...
disappeared.
And Olaf came in and did a beautiful job to sweep the slate clean, victimise the people reporting the fraud to the extent they tried to section some of them.
Right.
And great job. Great job, Bob.
Brilliant job. So that's Bob Kerslake with a spectacular 35-year public service career.
And we have to say, common purpose future leader, of course.
Of course.
Selected for his leadership capability.
Okay, and so the news that came out today was that this new chief executive of the civil service is going to be recruited from the private sector. So the Cabinet Office has made clear, according to this article, that its new chief executive will require substantial experience as a top businessman, ruling out the vast majority of serving civil servants. Now, my understanding is that at this point, nobody from the business world has actually applied for the job so far. So that must be pretty disappointing for them. We understand that the job will receive a salary of somewhere between £180,000 and £200,000 a year. And get this, Brian, the appointee will attend Cabinet as an observer. This is supposed to be a sweetener for somebody from the business world to come into a public sector job, that you get to attend Cabinet meetings. So Cabinet meetings where sensitive information is being discussed, and it's almost like you get a special backstage pass to the circus.
Well, I think anybody who wanted to apply for that job should just pop down to Plymouth and come and visit us in the UK column offices first, because we could probably brief them pretty substantially as to what to expect in government.
Yeah. So okay. That's that.
Well, a number of you sent in emails saying, have we seen that the Nottingham eviction had made mainstream press? So I think the Mail was given to us, and here's the BBC reporting. We had a look at these articles, and we're fascinated that in the reports there's not one shred of serious investigation into the case or the fraud committed within the courts. So what we've really got here, we think, is that the mainstream media has been pressurised into reporting, because this was pretty extraordinary, 300 people on the streets, and at the end of the day, the bailiffs backed off. We know we're dealing with Bradford and Bingley, so linked through to Northern Rock and a restructuring. Actually, this is the government trying to repossess the house. But in the article, there is absolutely no investigation or serious comment on what the whole thing is about. So this is a smokescreen, and if we just pump across to the Mail, exactly the same thing. It's all very happy-go-lucky. This is all a bit of fun. This is a lot of people on the streets, but it's all nonsense. Storm in a teacup, because, of course, there was no crime committed. So we say be very, very careful with this type of stuff, because this is designed to take the bulk of the public away from the real facts of what's happening, fraudulent court documents, and many people across the country now reporting property taken after irregularities with the court's documents and, of course, the bailiffs. Well, this is the company, of course, at the centre of the storm, Bradford and Bingley, UK Asset Recovery, but actually it's owned by the government. We tried to get a statement out of them today. We got a call back, but it was rather bizarre. The gentleman said he was from Brunswick Media. We think this is the company here. And Well, what did he have to say to our questions of what did they have to say about allegations of fraudulent documents? He said, well, we've called you to say that we can't speak to you. So I said, well, why did you call me? And he was a bit flummoxed at that. But this is a very, very expensive media relations company. So if you want them to call somebody to tell them that they don't really know why they're calling in the first place, presumably you need one of the Brunswick team.
We're silent again.
We're silent, yeah.
Okay, banks. Well, Philip Blond. Here's Philip Blond. Philip Blond is erstwhile lecturer in Christian theology at Cambridge University, lecturer in theology, erstwhile lecturer in theology at Exeter University, and he was director of the Progressive Conservatism Project at Demos. He left Demos due to what he called political and philosophical differences, and he established his own think tank, Res Publica, and he calls himself a political philosopher, and he says that banking is an honourable profession that just needs to recover its honour. And he is an Englishman, but it's a shame he can't spell in English. I'm sure that's just the Twitter effect, leaving the U's out to save characters or something. But anyway, let's look at just how honourable banking is. Here we have the continuing fallout from LIBOR, as some bankers get suspended today from Lloyds. Not a police investigation.
It's not money laundering.
No money laundering. No arrests. No bail conditions for ripping off millions of people. No, they get suspended, no doubt on full pay. And why? Because Lloyds has been hit with a £226 million bill from regulators on both sides of the Atlantic for rigging the interest rates. Lloyds, of course, which is 24% taxpayer owned, and apparently a total of 22 people are bound up in this latest regulatory crackdown, not criminal investigation, a regulatory crackdown, and their identities are not revealed in a series of emails that have been released. They're being referred to as Manager A or Trader B. And The Guardian here doesn't mention, as I say, whether they're suspended on full pay or not, but I'm sure they are. And it's okay, though, because although technically a hedge fund is not a bank, hedge fund managers come out of banking, so I think they can be given special status here. This is a continuing saga of Argentina, which the so-called vulture funds are trying to asset strip. And these are hedge funds which have bought up distressed Argentinian bonds and who took Argentina to court in the US to have those bonds honoured. Now Argentina is highly likely to default on repayment of this debt, and according to Mother Jones here, this is driving up demand for Argentinian bonds on the markets, and they're asking why, and they're suggesting it's because the bankers, these honourable bankers, are in a win-win situation. If Argentina capitulates to the vulture funds, then the law says that whatever deal the vultures get, then the other bondholders get the same deal as well. On the other hand, if Argentina defaults on the alleged debt, then the bondholders not only get the face value of the bonds eventually, but they get interest at 8% on top. So, as I say, the Mother Jones article, not entirely sure if this is why there's such demand for Argentinian bonds right now, but I think it's a plausible suggestion. Argentina, we've got to remember, is fighting the global financial system. It has been targeted, but as you can see, it's been targeted in a very honourable way. And equally honourable, of course, is the use of dark pools. Now, dark pools are private trading facilities provided by honourable bankers to only the most honourable bankers. So you and I couldn't take part because we're not honourable bankers, and especially those that you might call high-frequency traders. But an investor in the US has decided that this secret activity, is just too honourable for her, and so she has taken a class action lawsuit against Barclays, and the class action names the current chief executive Anthony Jenkins, the former chief executive Bob Diamond, finance director I'm having trouble with my names today, Mozaria, and ex-finance chief Chris Lucas, and they're all named as defendants. And this investor claims that she and other buyers of Barclays American Depository shares lost money because Barclays maximised profits for themselves by executing the bulk of their purchases through high-frequency trading and using their so-called dark pools. And in parallel with that, of course, there's actually a regulatory investigation, not a criminal one, a regulatory investigation into the broader use of dark pools, and UBS and Deutsche Bank are named as being particularly honourable in those investigations as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. And that's it on banking, I believe.
So a bit of corruption, bit of fraud, corruption, bit of money laundering.
But it's all the most honourable type.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So probably stop their bonuses.
Yes. Well, the suspension on full pay for a while, and then you get brought back at some point in the future.
Stop your bonus and reinstated. Meanwhile, the child abuse victims we put in prison. Well, I thought this man looked somewhat similar to a scared rabbit. This is the Energy Minister, Matthew Hancock, and he's a bit embarrassed because he got caught live on camera, unable to name a single village or really anybody that supported fracking. So I don't know, can't quite get my head around the expression on that face, but it's vacant, it's looking a bit worried. Well, there you have it. So government policy without any major debate in Parliament is to introduce fracking, as Ian Crane is warning. And this is, I'll stick with Muppet. This is another one of the Muppets that we've got actually controlling our daily lives. We just highlight that. Fails to name a single village that supports fracking. Well, if you're doing the right thing, you can look forward to 68 days under house arrest at home while the Scottish junta under Alex Salmond decides what their next move is to help protect paedophiles in the establishment. But Robert Greene, very quietly and bravely at home, having to report to his local police station every day while he waits for his possible trial on charges that he still doesn't know, a trial which is at the moment on the calendar for January 2015. Does this go on in Russia? I'm going to say I'm finding it pretty difficult to say that this
it's
goes
worse.
On.
Yeah. But we're going to have a guest on Thursday that knows quite a lot about this and is going to be talking about this in some detail.
That's the plan. The time has come to really get into the heart of what's been going on around Robert. But the key thing is, of course, there are still no full and proper charges against him. But you know, that shouldn't hold anybody back. Let's get the man in prison as fast as possible, where he can be silenced. If you're discovering that we're being a little bit sarcastic today, it's because we look at a lot of news. We found over the last couple of weeks in particular, mainstream dross the whole thing. So whilst these very serious events go on across the world, we're seeing Russia, of course, getting increasingly worried by the aggression coming from the European Union and NATO. It's I think, obvious that the aim is to take the public's mind off what the real events are in the world at the moment. If you still haven't written a letter on behalf of Robert Greene or Melanie Shaw, or you still haven't written to your local MP telling them what they should be doing, please do it. Because when we have hundreds of thousands, millions of people starting to put the pressure on these appalling people, we can expect to see a few of them starting to run for cover. I think that's it.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.